My name is Deirdre Micklethwaite and I work at the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman, also known as PHSO. I'm an assistant director there. I work in our operations team, leading our teams that look at our more serious cases and our high-risk cases as well. And I'm here today to talk to you about how we take stories such as we've heard from Melissa and we try to turn those into actions for service improvements, taking the stories of people who've been through very difficult experiences and with a particular focus on our work on sepsis. So who are we? A lot of people probably haven't heard of us. We're not a huge organisation and we're not a regulator in the style of the General Medical Council or the Care Quality Commission. We're a complaint handler and we represent the final stage of the complaints process for the NHS in England and for UK government departments. So, for example, the Department of Work and Pensions, HMRC. The majority of the complaints that we receive are about healthcare. It represents about 80% of our casework, and to put that into figures, last year that equated to approximately 28,000 complaints. Of course, that represents a really small fraction of the interactions that happen across the NHS every day. You know, we only see the things that go wrong, and we see the things that have gone wrong and led to a complaint, and we only see the complaints that weren't resolved at a local level. So it is a very small fraction that we see, but nonetheless, it does bring some really powerful stories of how individuals have been affected. The outcomes that we can achieve as an organisation can be broadly divided into those which give an individual remedy. So people frequently come to us wanting to understand what has happened. They're seeking an acknowledgement and an apology. Also really importantly though as well is to see services improved. And especially so in our health complaints, people will say to us they just want learning to happen. So they want to be reassured that other families will not have to go through the experience that they did so. So our current vision, we're currently in a one-year bridging strategy, setting out what we want to achieve as an organisation. It's 1 year because we're waiting for a new ombudsman who's going to join us shortly, at which point we'll do a much longer term strategy. In the next year, we've got 3 pillars to the strategy. The first one is about improving our service. As we've heard from Melissa, it's really hard to pursue a complaint to try and find out what has happened. People have been through quite often a very traumatic experience and they're having to go through that process of bereavement and grieving. To then take a complaint through the local process and understand and get to grips with what has happened is extremely exhausting for people. And then to be able to come to us as a stage and have to tell your story yet again to another set of people, I don't underestimate how hard it is for people to do that. So one of our key aims for this year is to make it as easy as we can for people to find us when they need to do so. And that's going to involve us working more closely with the advisory sector so they can signpost people to us. And it's about us also working to gather and analyse more demographic data so we can understand more about who comes to us and most importantly who doesn't, because we think we've got some gaps in people who can come to us. Secondly, once people have got to us, we want to start delivering a really good user experience. We want to use digital improvements to make it a lot easier for people to contact us and track the progress of their case. And on our most straightforward cases, we want to deliver decisions much quicker to people. And we know we've not always got it right in how we interact with organisations, so we want to improve how we can notify organisations about our decision. And our third pillar is about delivering greater impact from our casework. We want to look at the recommendations that we make and assess whether those are having the impact we intend them to have. It's a really crowded landscape in healthcare. Lots of improvements being delivered, and we want to make sure that we are the recommendations we make on our reports are helpful and delivering change. We've also got an aim to increase the number of cases that we publish so that we are being more transparent about the work we do and we're able to put out much more learning about complaints than we've considered. So I'll just talk very briefly about how we do our work. We have a 3-step process when a complaint comes to us. At the first step, we are checking whether we can look at the complaint. Is it in our jurisdiction? Has the individual been through the organisation's own complaint process? We would generally expect that to happen first, because a resolution quicker and sooner at a local level will give a better result usually for an individual. Our next step is to look at, take a closer look, we describe it as, and should we go ahead and investigate it? And in this, we're considering factors such as whether the organisation seems to have got something wrong, whether that's had an impact on an individual, and whether that has been put right. Because sometimes people will come to us and we'll look at that and we'll agree something seems to have gone wrong, we can see you've been affected, but actually what we think that the local complaints team has done has been sufficient to put that right. We also look at whether there's an option for someone to take a legal claim. If someone's seeking a very significant financial remedy, it's likely the courts is going to be the right place for them to pursue that concern rather than ourselves. And we look as well, along with, I think, almost every public sector, we're facing increasing demand on our services, so we're having to very carefully look at what we can do. And we try to focus on the more serious cases, or those cases where we think there's potential for greater impact. So, we might look at something and think, well, if we could put a recommendation in here, it's going to impact on many, many people. Our third step is an investigation, and in this process, we've shifted in recent years to try to work much more closely with the parties involved. So that will involve us talking to the individual who's brought the complaint to us to agree what we're going to look at and having a really clear agreement about what's going to be in the scope of that investigation. And we'll share that with all parties, so the person who's brought the complaint with the organisation, and there's an opportunity for everyone to give comments on what we're going to look at. Sometimes that can mean that the organisation will say, actually, we'll take steps now at this point and we'll try and resolve that, which obviously, given a quicker solution to the complainant, is far better. If they don't, we will then move into our investigation and we will gather the evidence. And once we've formulated our what we call our emerging view, we'll talk again to all parties to share that before we formalise it in a written document, which we share as our provisional views. And it's really important that it's seen as that, because it's the opportunity for everybody to see that this is what we think. Have a look at that, talk to us if you think we've not got it quite right, provide further evidence if you want to. And we'll include in that as well, these are the recommendations we're likely to make, so we can talk to the organisation about how feasible and practical those are. Once we've received those comments and considered them, we'll then move on to issue our final report. It's important to note that our casework staff are not medically qualified. We are all lay people, myself included. But in the majority of health complaints that we receive, we are going to need some clinical input to help us understand what has happened. And we have a fantastic team of clinical advisors who work for us. We're recruiting as well at the moment. So, if you think it's something that you would be interested in, please do look at our website. We're a great organisation. Okay, to sell that. We have a small team of internal clinical advisors. They don't work for us full time. It's really important that our advisors all have some NHS work because they need to help us understand how work is actually performed, not just how the guidance says it should be performed, but actually what is the reality in the NHS. So work might be performed not quite to guidance, but actually it's still acceptable in the whole environment that we're looking at. And they can help us identify as well when actually no, it's fallen beyond that just, under no circumstances should that have happened. Along with a small group of internal clinical advisors, we have a larger external group of what we call our external advisors, and they provide advice to us on a less frequent basis on more specialised clinical areas. It can be, complainants can sometimes be concerned when they come to us because there is a sense, I think, of a loss of trust in the NHS if they've been through a difficult experience, and they can be quite concerned around whether they're going to get a fair shout from us if we're going to have NHS staff involved in their complaints. So we have a really clear conflict of interest policy. The simplest thing, our advisors won't, for example, work on a case that where it's an organisation where they work, and we test that very carefully. bear with me 1 second. I don't think I'm pressing hard enough on this. No. Oh, right. There we go. I'm going all over now, aren't I? Okay, so on to sepsis, which we're here today to talk about. Back in 2013, we published a report, Time to Act. This highlighted the deaths of NHS patients after a failure to diagnose and rapidly treat sepsis. It wasn't just the work of PHSO, although we brought together the stories of patients. We worked closely together with NHS England. We worked with NICE, UK Sepsis Trust, the Royal College of Physicians, the Royal College of Surgeons and the College of Emergency Medicine to find the solutions identified in our report. As you'll see from the themes highlighted on the slide, a really common theme we identified was around not acting quickly. And I'm sure you'll be sort of reflecting back to just what we've heard from Melissa. It was around delays in diagnosis, delays in starting treatment, delays in referring to critical care. One of the stories in the report described a failure to act on abnormal vital signs and then the inadequate monitoring of a patient as they deteriorated. A lot of the stories involve patients who were critically unwell and, they might not have survived even if they had received the treatment they should have done. But the failings in treatment meant that families were left with the knowledge that there could have been a different outcome, that an opportunity was missed to provide potentially life-saving treatment. And we see from families who come to us and talk to us that this uncertainty can be a really devastating thing for them to come to terms with families left berating themselves for not doing something differently, left trying to come to terms with how things could have been different. Although action has been, I think I'm out of sequence with my slides, but I'll roll with it. Sorry. Action's been taken to improve the recognition and treatment of sepsis since our last report 10 years ago. But we're still seeing evidence from our casework that there's an urgent need for much more to be done. And we published another report in 2003, which was a spotlight on sepsis. And those cases featured stories including a story of a patient who was admitted to hospital with a worsening COPD and had a fall when in hospital. They then suffered a cardiac arrest from which they sadly did not recover and died soon after. After reviewing the evidence, our clinical advisor said it was quite apparent that the patient had pneumonia and had been deteriorating throughout the admission, and they developed sepsis, which had caused the fall. And there was no evidence to us to show that the trust had suspected sepsis either before or after the fall. And they hadn't picked that up in their local complaint handling either, which was the opportunity to provide some answers to the family much sooner. Crucially, NHS staff have to be sepsis aware, and colleagues in the room will be well aware there's been a multitude of initiatives to drive up confidence in staff in diagnosis, treating and acting upon the signs of sepsis in a timely way. However, as the Ombudsman, we think that in order to ensure that change can happen and colleagues at all levels are empowered to deliver the best possible care in line with guidelines, process and protocol, there is the piece of the jigsaw missing. And that's reflected in the environment and systems in which care is being delivered and patients treated and colleagues work. And there has to be a culture that's open, accepts that mistakes when they do happen, but then learns from them. And it's a responsibility of NHS leadership to build this environment of honesty and accountability. And this is a big step, we think, in making patient safety an absolute priority. As we said before, the things that families who bring complaints to us about sepsis care, and arguably these are not even sepsis specific, is about a much broader cultural shift. Firstly, it's about the importance of listening. When we speak to families affected by sepsis and who've brought their complaint to us, we ask them about what change did they want to see to put things right. And from families, it isn't about nice guidelines or antibiotic regimes, but it's actually what they want is to make sure voices like theirs are listened to and acted on. They want NHS organisations to make meaningful changes so what happened to them doesn't happen to others in the future. They want recognition of that and an apology. And as I said before, people say to us they bring a complaint through what is a lengthy and at times traumatic process. And we see people being re-traumatised through having to retell the story of their event that happened to them. And they're doing that less for them and their family and what they will get from it, but it's more about wanting to make sure it won't happen again in the future. And for that, we need cultures that are open, accept that mistakes will happen in the very complex modern healthcare setting, and that there's an opportunity to actively learn from those mistakes. And NHS leadership is responsible to build at all levels environments that are transparent, accountable, and where patients and families feel listened to, and championing of feedback rather than brushing complaints aside. Mistakes are sadly inevitable in a health system that's made up of humans and where care is delivered through multiple individual interactions. But failing to learn from those mistakes is not inevitable. We don't think the NHS has to act alone in making this shift. And at the Ombudsman, we see ourselves as playing an important role in supporting organisations to adopt and embed that learning into practice. Some of this is for us to make sure that in our investigations we make the right recommendations, and we've got work to do to improve that. We know we have to do. We need to make the recommendations at the right time, and we need to then strengthen compliance to make sure that those recommendations are followed through. We want to use our voice as a national ombudsman to harness learning and expertise to inform practice and policy, which is rooted in people's lived experience of when public services have failed to deliver for them, their loved ones, and when they have to make a complaint. So it's also about practical tools, about building capacity and building up NHS confidence in handling complaints at a local level. So on that final point, I want to briefly highlight the NHS complaint standards. In 2003, we rolled out our continuing professional development accredited training, and this course is designed to help NHS organisations deliver the complaint standards. We've developed guides that include topics such as capturing and reporting on learning from complaints and how to manage challenging situations in complaint handling. We have a course on how to recognise and resolve complaints early. It's available as e-learning, and so far this year we've had around 600 NHS staff complete the course. We've also updated other e-learning modules and some practical online workshops. And I think in total we've had nearly 1,000 NHS staff from over 180 organisations complete the training courses. And we've had a really positive follow-up to that, really positive results in our follow-up evaluation, with 93% of staff saying the training helped them to make positive changes to the way they deal and respond to complaints. So please, if you think that's something that your organisation would be interested in, do get in touch with us. It's a free resource there that's designed to help us make that shift so we can listen to complaints. To finish, three things I really want us to think about as we leave today. First of all, it's about the importance of complaints. This is really important information. It's free feedback, and that's such a gift. It's people telling you, despite the plans, the process, the protocols, the huge effort. I've got family members who work in the NHS. I know how much commitment and effort and hard work people put in. People go in to do a good job, but things might not go right. Complaints are that free information, really rich source of information to let you know how that's being experienced by people. And as we talked about, the importance of listening to people, understanding what has happened, being open and accepting when those mistakes have happened, and trying to provide the answers as soon as possible can really help families in their journeys of grieving to come to grips with that much sooner, and building better on our recommendations and making sure that we can deliver improvements. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope that's been a useful introduction into PHSO and what we do. My contact details are on the slides, and do get in touch with us if you have any follow-up. Thank you very much.